20 years ago, I was arrested for hacking. I'd already been, shall we say, experimenting with what I could do with computers for a few years, mostly hacking games so that I could play them for free. But this time was different. I'd hacked into a corporate network. And this was back in the 90s, so the internet existed, the web existed, but most corporate networks still operated over the phone line. So one computer with a modem would place a phone call to another computer with a modem which would answer that, and then they could speak to each other over the phone line. And I'd had a very specific target in mind for who I wanted to hack. And so essentially what I'd done was I'd dumpster dived for a computer that they'd thrown away. I'd gone to the trash and taken a computer that they'd thrown away. I'd taken it home. I'd undeleted contents off of the hard drive. That allowed me to recover usernames, passwords, phone numbers. And all of that information gave me what I needed to dial into their network and start to download files. However, I'd been caught. And as I said, this was in the 90s, so there were laws already around hacking in the UK, but most police weren't aware of these laws. So they wanted to charge me with 1 count of fraud for every time I'd used someone else's username. And they wanted to charge me with 1 count of theft for every single file that I'd downloaded. So I was looking at 4 counts of fraud, I was looking at a few dozen counts of theft, and I remember being 17 years old, sat in the police station, and the police added it all up, and let me know that I was looking at about 287 years in prison. Shit. Okay. So there's nothing like being told you're going to go to prison for 300 years to make you reevaluate your life decisions. So I managed to gloss over this whole situation, and I realized that I needed to do something a little bit more constructive with these sort of urges that I had to tinker with things and break things. And it turns out there's a lot of similarities between the mindset of a hacker and the mindset of being a good SEO. In both cases, you have this black box. It might be a corporate network, or it might be Google's algorithm. And you cannot see inside this black box. What you can do, though, is from the outside, you can try things. You can see what the outputs look like. You can try to understand how does this black box work, and then try to manipulate it into doing the things that you want it to do. And the early days of SEO, certainly sort of late 90s and the early 2000s, were very, very, very heavy on having that sort of mindset of testing and trying stuff. There were no webmaster tools or search console from Google. Google didn't really talk to SEOs. Everything that we learned through experimentation. So today I'm going to be talking about basically that I think we've gone so far away from that sort of mindset into a very sort of stale mindset of best practices. We look at the guidelines, we read some blog posts, and we go away and we decide what to do. And we don't test our assumptions, and we don't try stuff anymore. So today I'm going to be talking about a few of the experiments that I've done over the last few years. It's mostly going to be black hat stuff, because I do believe that to be a really good white hat SEO, you need to have an understanding of black hat, and it's also a bit of fun. But everything I'm talking about can be applied, the ways of thinking and thinking outside the box can also be applied to white hat SEO, and that's what I do in my day-to-day job. Toby mentioned the Distilled ODM platform, where we do A/B testing for SEO, and we try a lot of sort of braver stuff with that platform. So I'm going to be talking about black hat stuff, mostly. I should start off by saying my employer, Distilled, is a very white hat agency. We don't do grey hat or black hat stuff for our clients. We think that doesn't really work in the long term. I want to be very clear about this. I don't know if John Mueller's in here, but if John Mueller tweets anything about Tom Anthony just stood on stage and promoted black hat, I want to get fired in a couple of days, so don't do black hat things. Having said that, let's spend the next 30 minutes talking about black hat stuff. There's John. Okay, so I'm going to talk about 4 sets of experiments. The first 2 sets of experiments, the social media stuff and the Google manual action stuff, are kind of fun and interesting, but maybe not directly related to SEO straight away. But they're fun in and of themselves. But also, I'm going to be using those 2 sets of experiments to introduced some technologies that you're going to need to understand for the latter two sets of experiments. The XML sitemaps is something that I reported to Google. They fixed it in April last year, so this is the first SMX Munich where I've been able to talk about that. They paid me $5,000 for that, and that was, I think, the first time they've paid anyone for a black hat SEO attack and revealing how it worked. And then the blue stuff is more recent black hat experiments I've been doing. This is what I tweeted about, injecting links into other people's sites, and we talk about how that works. I have reported this to Google. They've failed to fix it, and so I'm going to be talking about it because I think you need to know about it so you can defend yourselves against it. Okay, so let's start off by talking about social networks. So a few years ago, I wrote a little JavaScript library that you could put onto any page that you had, any website, and it would tell you, are the visitors to this page logged into Facebook? Are they logged into Twitter? Are they logged into Google and Google+? And that was kind of cool and kind of fun. So I'm going to talk about how that works, and then I'm going to talk about some of the uses of it. OK, so imagine I had a Facebook profile, and it was at this URL. If a user was logged in and they went to this URL, they would get a 200 response and they would see my profile page. If the user was not logged into Facebook, then what would happen is that Facebook would 302 redirect that user to the login page. You need to be logged in to Facebook to see the profile. And they would include this continue parameter, and that is used by the login page to tell the page where should I redirect the user to once they've logged in. Because it would be a really bad experience if I just ended up on the home page of Facebook after logging in if I'd been trying to get to a specific profile. So they use this continue parameter, and lots of websites do this. OK, so if you've got this login page with this continue parameter and you've got this URL, what happens if you go directly to this URL rather than Facebook redirecting you there? If you're logged in, already logged in, then Facebook is clever enough to realize, oh, this user's already logged in. They don't need to see the login page. We can just redirect them to the page specified in the continue parameter. So they just get 302 to my profile page. If the user's not logged in, then they just get a 200 response. They see the login page, and then they can log in, and then they'll be redirected. The interesting thing is we can change the value of that continue parameter to do anything that we want. We can send you to different URLs. And we can change that to be an image, like this. So here, if the user is logged in and we send them to this login URL, then they'll be 302 redirected to this image. If the user's not logged in, they just see the login page. Hopefully that makes sense. So at this point, this URL at the top will serve an image to anyone who's logged into Facebook. It will serve a web page to anyone who's not logged into Facebook. So we've got this certain URL that serves a different response based on whether you're logged in or not. We can then take that URL and we can put it inside an image tag and put that image tag on your website. And JavaScript has a nice little set of functions that will allow a website to determine, did an image load correctly? Did it load, and is it an image? So at this point, and you don't need to understand that code up there, but you can just understand that in our image, if an image loads successfully, then one JavaScript function works. If the image didn't load because it's actually a web page, then a different JavaScript function runs. So now we have a JavaScript function that we can determine, that can be used to determine, is the user visiting this web page logged in to Facebook or not? So I did this for a couple of different websites. Since then, there's been a project to take that and extend it so that there's now sort of dozens of websites that you can use this on, and you can put this onto your website, start tracking, are users logged into all these different other websites? There's a few sort of fun things you can do with this. You can put this information into your Google Analytics. So if you're trying to build personas, you can use this to see for your website or a client's website, typically what social media networks are people using. You can build that up over time. You can use it to customize the social buttons on your page. So if you know a user's logged into Twitter and Instagram and Reddit, you could show those buttons and not other buttons to them. My favorite usage of this is to do it to your competitors. If I'm hotels.com, I can do this to booking.com. And if I get a visitor come to my website, I can see, OK, this visitor on my site is a Booking.com user. They're logged into Booking.com. And at this point, I can start to try to manipulate them into switching sides to me, offering them deals or whatever it might be. So this was a fun sort of project in and of its own, and so you can take this and use it. There's something about GDPR there. I'm not really sure what, but in England we've got Brexit coming, so maybe we'll just cancel GDPR. Something about, I'm not a lawyer, this is not legal advice. The observation of this, and this is what we're going to come back to later on, is that redirects that are on your website can be abused and used by other people to determine information about your users. And we're going to come back to that later on. Okay, so let's switch gears and talk about something that was a little bit more of a direct attack on Google. So I don't know how many years most of you have been in the industry. I would say I'm showing my age, but I guess I did that when I talked about being arrested 20 years ago. But in the early days of SEO, there was no Search Console and there was no manual actions or manual penalties tool inside Search Console. And so a big part of SEO was trying to determine, is your client or is your website, does it have a penalty? We would have clients coming to us at Distilled, and they would want to know, have they got a penalty or not? And we would do all sorts of things to try and work this out. And then on August 8th, 2013, it was a big day in SEO because Google said, inside Search Console, we're going to give you direct access to this information. So you're going to be able to see for your website if you have any manual actions. And everybody's very excited about this because it was a big step for us. Unfortunately, the next day, Google took it down again. And they said that there had been a snag, some sort of problem, and they'd had to take the tool offline. I was that problem. About 2 hours after I got access to the tool, I broke it, had an email with Matt Cutts, and they took it down. So I'm going to talk you through how that tool worked and what I did. So for those not familiar with the tool, this is now dead. This is the old Search Console. I think it died last week. But on the left, you would see this manual action section. You could click on that, and then you can see, do you have any site-wide manual actions? Do you have any partial match manual actions on your site? So in this example, you can see some unnatural links. And so what I wanted to do was I wanted to see if behind the scenes there was any extra information that we could get, ascertain. Was there more information that Google just wasn't showing us? So I started to have a look at what was Google sending back and forth over the network. And what happens when you load that page is the Search Console uses JavaScript, and it sends a post request. You don't need to understand necessarily, if you're not familiar with it, what that is, but it sends a request using JavaScript to this URL, or a URL similar to this, and it sends this big block of data. And you definitely don't need to understand this. I don't understand this. It's a bit like the Matrix with all the green text coming down a screen. But what I did notice was it had my domain name in there. And so JavaScript sends this block of information off to Google, and Google sends back a bit of information, which I also didn't understand, but I could see what was happening in the Search Console, and so I knew this meant there was no manual actions on this site, because I didn't have any. Okay, so then, using my elite hacking skills, having seen Neo in the Matrix, I changed tomanthony.co.uk to another website, and I just sent the request again, behind the scenes. Sure, Google said. Here's the information about apple.com or whatever it was. So suddenly I found myself as the only person in the world other than Google who had direct access into their manual actions penalty database. And I could look up manual penalties for any website. So I did what any self-respecting SEO would do, and I wrote a script to start crawling all the websites of the world and find out their manual actions penalties. And some websites had more problems than others. I'm not going to tell you who this was, but okay, so at this point, because I'm, as I said, a nice white hat person, just reaffirming that if John Mueller's in here somewhere, very white hat. At this point, I'd confirmed that there was a problem, and so I let Google know that there was a security issue. This was after I'd scraped a fair amount of the database. And they took it down, and a few days later, they got the tool back up and running, and that was all good. Everybody was happy. Then I got this ominous email from Matt Cutts saying, we can see that you're still trying to connect to the database, I'd forgotten to turn off my script. So as soon as they turned the platform back on, my script started trying to download their database again. And I got this lovely email from Matt Cutts basically telling me to stop. OK, so this was kind of fun. Google's response was really amazing. They acknowledged the report like within 11 minutes. Like Matt Cutts got back to me saying, holy shit, this is bad. They had taken it offline within a couple of hours. They fixed it within 4 days, and they gave me $5,000, which was very nice. Woo! So a couple of takeaways there. One is that a lot more websites, it turned out, I was shocked at how many of the websites I checked had manual actions, manual penalties at that point in time. There was a lot more of that going on than I anticipated. I think that's probably less so the case nowadays, because I think a lot more of the old manual actions are now being replaced with algorithmic stuff. But an important observation that we're going to come back to in a moment is that Google Search Console is not bulletproof. If you start prodding around, I found that sometimes it breaks, and it'll tell you stuff that it maybe shouldn't. So we're going to come back to that in a moment. So far, I've not shown you any sort of direct manipulation of the search results. So let's have a look at the next experiment I ran. And this was something that I wrote about middle of last year. Google fixed this in April, so this is the first time I've been able to talk about this at SMX Munich. So let's revisit a couple of the things that we've noted so far. Firstly, redirects can be abused to get unexpected behaviors. Secondly, Search Console, as we just saw, is not necessarily bulletproof. So let's see if we can combine those two things. So hopefully you're all familiar with the concept of XML sitemaps. If you're not, it's essentially you can create a snippet of XML, you can host that somewhere, and you can send it to Google, and it contains a list of the URLs on your website, and then that tells Google, these are my URLs, or some of my URLs. It lets you tell Google how important you consider them to be, how often they refresh, and if you've got international equivalents in other languages or locations. So it has quite a lot of power in what it can tell Google, and you can just submit this information. You can upload it to your website, and inside Search Console, you can submit your XML sitemap, or you can put it inside your robots.txt file just with a sitemap marker. And Google will fetch that and do stuff with it. There's also another way you can submit a sitemap, and that's via what Google call the ping mechanism. So basically, on their documentation, they've got this note about how it works. Basically, if you go to google.com/ping, you can put in the URL of a sitemap, and Google say you can use this to resubmit a sitemap. If you've already submitted a sitemap, this is how you get Google to come back and crawl it again, to let them know that it's been updated. But that's not entirely true. What I found was that you could submit brand new sitemaps using this tool. Typically, if you send a request to that ping URL to Google, Googlebot shows up on your website within 10 seconds normally to download that new XML sitemap. There's no authentication on this. So you can do this. I could do this to Toby's domain. I would never do that to you. But you can basically submit a ping mechanism to any URL, and Google will go and fetch it. And also, Google follows redirects, which is really interesting, because we've just talked about how redirects can sometimes be abused. Google have a checklist for what is a valid XML sitemap. The sitemap must be correctly formatted. So if they can't read it, it's not going to be useful to them. That makes sense. All the URLs in that sitemap must exist. If you're submitting sitemaps with URLs that don't exist, it's probably not a very trustworthy sitemap. The site containing the URLs, so if you're submitting URLs for apple.com, apple.com has to be registered inside Google Search Console. That's going to be true for most big websites nowadays. And interestingly, the site hosting the sitemap must be in Google Search Console. And this last one is very interesting, because this told me that you don't need to have the sitemap on the same site as the site containing URLs. If you are, I don't know, MediaMarkt, and you've got MediaMarkt.de, and maybe you have MediaMarkt.at, I don't know, you could put all your sitemaps on the .de, even the sitemap about the .at domain. And Google are fine with that, as long as you've got them both registered in Search Console. Obviously, there's some authentication around that. You cannot just go into Search Console and submit a sitemap containing URLs to other people's websites. This is a screenshot of my Search Console, and Jono Alderson is not speaking here this year, so we're going to pick on him. I tried to submit an XML sitemap with URLs on his website, and Google told me, URL not allowed. You're not allowed to do this. You are not jonoalderson.com. You cannot submit sitemap directives for him. Okay, so we know that Google follows redirects, and we know that you can host the XML sitemap on a different domain. So the questions I had were, will Google follow cross-domain sitemap redirects? If you redirected them to another, Google to another site, would Google follow that and try to look for an XML sitemap somewhere else? And would they trust it? So we can start to verify this with a couple of basic experiments. So the first one is, this is just to highlight, I've hidden the actual sites, but just to test whether this works. So we're going to host a sitemap.xml file, and we're going to put it on the imaginary domain blue.com. Then we're going to set up a redirect on green.com. So green.com next equals blue.com sitemap.xml. All of that URL does is the 302 redirect from green.com to blue.com. Then we can submit that whole URL to Google, and we can see whether they actually go and download that sitemap. And I can tell you, yes, they do. They're more than happy, and this makes sense. If you're MediaMarkt, you might submit mediamarkt.de/sitemap _at.xml and then redirect to the AT site. So will they trust this sitemap if it's been redirected to another domain? For now, let's just assume that they do. So then the question is, how could we exploit it? So we're going to keep picking on Jono because he's not here. So Jono's going to be our innocent victim. So you can imagine that he's got a website, jono.com. And this is where we get back to the redirect URLs that we talked about at the start with the social media attack. So basically, we can use the same login or logout mechanism. It's better to use a logout mechanism because now everybody gets redirected. It doesn't matter if you're logged in or logged out. Anyone going to this URL would be redirected to jono.com/page, like this. Okay. So then we're going to introduce our attacker. That's going to be me. And I'm going to have tom.com. And so now what we're going to do is we're going to step up the redirects to do what are called open redirects, cross-domain redirects. So now, in this continue parameter, rather than just put a path to a page or an image, we're going to put a whole other website. And what happens here is now we've created a URL on jono.com that forwards the user to tom.com. This is nice. This is very useful for us. Sorry, Jono. So now what we could do is we could take that one step further. And rather than forward the user, whoever they might be, to just an HTML page on tom.com, we could change this to be a sitemap on tom.com. And so now we've got a URL on Jono's website that serves a user an XML sitemap that I control. Hopefully that makes sense. And so, just said that. Now, the user might happen to be Googlebot. What we can do is we can take that URL that we've just made on jono.com, and we can send it to that ping mechanism telling Googlebot, there's a sitemap here for you. And so Googlebot happily goes to fetch this URL to get the sitemap. It finds this URL that redirects, so Googlebot follows that and goes on to tom.com, gets the sitemap. So the question that we have now is, does Google think this sitemap is for tom.com, or does it think it's for jono.com? Well, we originally submitted jono.com, and it looks at the URL at that point, and so essentially it decides, yes, this is a URL. This sitemap, is a real sitemap for jono.com. But Jono doesn't know it exists. I made it. It's hosted on my website. So at this point, if you do this, you can now submit sitemaps that are trusted by Google for other people's websites. And that allows you to start submitting basically a variety of different search directives, including hreflang. Hreflang is really interesting because it allows you to take someone's page rank, all their equity, and it doesn't get transferred to your site, but you can borrow their page rank for your own ranking purposes. So this is all very nice and theoretical, so let's try it in the wild. So this is what I did. I'm going to show you real results. All the graphs I'm going to show you of the traffic and money and everything else are real graphs. But the screenshots of the websites I'm showing you, I've switched out the real victim in the attack that I did for a similarly sized UK retailer. So we're going to use Tesco.com. They're a large supermarket. They're similar to Raver or Aldi or whatever. OK, so what I'm going to do is Tesco.com are very large in the UK. They've got lots of links, lots of PageRank, but they only operate in the UK. They don't have any presence in the US. So we're going to manipulate hreflang entries and try to borrow their PageRank to rank in the US. Brexit's happening, so we're going to invade our old colonies and rebuild our empire. OK, only a British person can talk about Brexit. OK, so first thing that we need to do is we need to find, are there any redirects? We've already looked at the login mechanism, so unsurprisingly, we're going to try that first. I'm going to create an account on Tesco.com because I want the logout URL, and within 2 minutes, I've found this URL, logout, and it's got this from parameter. That's essentially the same as our continue parameter. Great, now I have a mechanism for redirecting Googlebot wherever I want it to. Then for $12, I'm going to register TescoGlobal.com and make it look like Tesco's new international site. Then I'm going to basically scrape Tesco's real website and mirror the URL structure, but I'm going to change the pounds to dollars and make what looks like a US version of their whole website. Fantastic. OK, so then we're going to create an XML sitemap. And we're going to create a whole bunch of, for all of Tesco's important URLs, in this example, tesco.com/example, working from the bottom up. We're going to create, we've got the English Great British version, so that's tesco.com/example. Then the next one up, we're going to have the English US version. That's going to be our new website, tescoglobal.com/example. And then just to really rub it in, we're going to add an xdefault and make our version the default version of the website from now on. OK, so we're going to take this evil sitemap. We're going to ping this to Google. So you can see we've got the Tesco URL, logout, continue equals Tesco Global. And we're going to send this ping mechanism to Google. Googlebot came to Tesco.com, got redirected to Tesco Global, where we've hosted this evil sitemap, and downloaded it and believed that this is a real sitemap for Tesco.com. So on my TescoGlobal.com search console, I immediately started getting crawled by Google, thousands of pages a day initially, right out of the box. SEMrush showed I suddenly appeared in Google.com in the US search results, immediately getting pretty decent traffic on day one, because Tesco.com had so much PageRank, and we're just borrowing that. In analytics, I started getting a little bit of traffic dribbling in. This is great. And I started appearing in first place for quite a lot of terms. And this was because there was a lot of British terms that were now in the US. And so for all the British terms for this website, we were immediately in the first place. But they were very low traffic, so they weren't necessarily very useful. At this point, all I've done is pinged that sitemap to Google. I have no links. I spent $12, and I've done nothing else. So analytics data shows more and more people starting to visit my lovely new e-commerce website. Some of them are, they're shopping, they're putting stuff in their cart, in their trolley. Some of them are trying to check out. I didn't let them. Where's John Mueller? I didn't let them. SEMrush shows traffic just keeps on going up and to the right. I'd love this for our real clients at Distill, just to have graphs that are just trickling up and to the right with no real effort. Then I started appearing on the first page for actual money terms. So this is on my site. It's 6 days old. It has no links. You've got Target. You've got Walmart, Amazon, Toys R Us, some of the largest websites in the world. And I'm starting to rank and started to beat them for some high money search terms. I haven't done anything. I definitely don't deserve to be ranking. I'm getting millions of search impressions, thousands of clicks. And then some funny things started happening. In Search Console, I started seeing links being reported from Tesco.com to my website because Google was implying links where there weren't any because Tesco was sort of hreflanging to me and calling me the default, so I was getting those links and being reported in my Search Console. Fine. Earlier on, I showed you that you cannot submit a sitemap inside Search Console for a website you don't control. What I found was after a few days, after a week and a little bit, Google somehow made a link between the real Tesco.com and my fake TescoGlobal.com and authorized me to start submitting sitemaps and getting directive information directly inside my Search Console. So now I was tracking the indexation on Tesco.com as well. And basically at this point, I'd spent about 4 hours of my time. I'd spent $12. I had no links, but I was getting millions of impressions, thousands of clicks, and I decided I should probably turn this off. What's really terrifying about this sort of attack is that it's completely undetectable because according to Google's own documentation, if you submit an XML sitemap via the ping mechanism, it does not appear in Search Console. So Tesco.com couldn't see that I'd submitted an XML sitemap for them. They were still ranking fine in the UK. I was just stealing all their equity to use it in the US, so they had no idea that there was suddenly this TescoGlobal.com site that was ranking based on the back of their brand. What was Google's official response to this? I reported this in 2017. Google awarded me $5,000 again, and in April 2018 fixed that issue. One important thing is, as part of their fix, they made it so if you submit sitemaps now via the ping mechanism and they have hreflang entries, they just ignore the hreflang entries. Such was the eloquence of their fix. We're just going to ignore it. You should make sure that you don't have open redirects, the sort of redirects. There's no reason for those login mechanisms using that continue parameter to let someone be redirected to a whole different website. If you have got that sort of issue on your site, then even though Google have fixed this, you should definitely go and fix that wider issue because it can definitely be abused in ways you hadn't anticipated. Last thing to say about this is that I've not seen this attack in the wild at all. I had a lot of people come to me asking me, we think this has happened to us, and I didn't see a single incident where this was actually being abused, so don't come and ask me afterwards thinking this might have happened to you. Okay, so all of that stuff that I've talked about so far is stuff that I've reported to Google and they've fixed. The most recent stuff is stuff that we talked about at the SEO Oktoberfest think tank a few months back, but hasn't been fixed. I reported this to Google back in November, and they cited like internal communication problems getting this fixed, so I don't know if they are planning to fix it or whatever. But it's been so long, and I have legitimate concerns that this could be happening to any of you. People could be abusing what I'm going to show you. So I'm going to be revealing it, talking about it today. Please don't use this for black hat purposes. This is more about educating you so you could defend against it. So we're going to talk about cross-site scripting attacks. So a cross-site scripting attack, an XSS attack, is a very old sort of web security problem. So you can imagine that you've got this little snippet of HTML with this PHP code in it. And all this PHP code does is it takes a value from a parameter in the URL, so page equals 1, and it puts it into the HTML of the page. So this should showing page 1 in the final HTML that's produced. But you can abuse this. If you've got someone who's injecting something from a URL into your web page and you're not cleaning it, then you could expect people to be trying stuff like this. So in this instance, if we did this to that same snippet, what would actually happen is it would produce this bit of HTML at the bottom, showing page, and then it puts a script tag, a JavaScript tag into that page that executes, in this case, just a simple alert, but you could inject any sort of JavaScript you wanted. The cross-site scripting problem is a widespread problem. If you go on to openbugbounty.org, which is a website where people can report security issues for any other website, there are well over 100,000 unfixed, unpatched cross-site scripting security issues there, and you can look up, and there's for a lot of big websites as well. So how does this look? Well, like this inside Chrome. If you try to do this inside modern Chrome, what happens is, if you look at the bottom arrow, you get blocked by the cross-site scripting auditor. The browser knows that this is dangerous. It shouldn't allow someone to be taking HTML and putting it into the URL, or JavaScript in the URL, and then that appearing on the page. If that happens, Chrome will not load the page. The auditor is not perfect. This is Bloomberg, and you can see that it fails to catch this one, and so you could inject JavaScript into Bloomberg. But it's better than Firefox, because Firefox doesn't even have a cross-site scripting auditor that I'm aware of. OK, so we also know that Googlebot is based off of Chrome 41. In a session earlier, if you're in it, with Bartosz and Martin Split from Google, Martin talked about that they were working on upgrading the rendering, and that might be a later version of Chrome, who knows. But for the moment, Googlebot essentially uses Chrome 41. And Chrome 41 did not have a cross-site scripting auditor. It didn't prevent you visiting these sorts of URLs. It just ran the JavaScript. We know from Bartosz, who was one of the first people I know of who was talking about Chrome 41 being what Googlebot was using, that they backport some security patches. So some of the latest security patches that affect modern Chrome, they backport those into Googlebot to protect Googlebot against those. I know because I downloaded the list of every exploit in Chrome and tried them all on Googlebot. But what this means is that Googlebot does not have a cross-site scripting auditor. And we also know that nowadays Googlebot executes JavaScript happily. So if we recap where we're at, we've got Googlebot using Chrome 41. Googlebot executes and indexes JavaScript. And Chrome 41 had no JavaScript injection protection. So hopefully at this point, it is fairly obvious what our next step should be. Essentially, the summary is Googlebot's going to execute any sort of cross-site scripting attack we do on it, and it's going to update those pages. So this is one of my earliest test attempts to check this. So this is inside the mobile-friendly tool. This is Revolut. I don't know if you've got Revolut in Germany. No, don't know. So they're basically a startup bank. They've been going a couple of years. They're quite big, but they're a startup bank promoting themselves for security. I'm showing Revolut example here because they've fixed this since. But essentially here you can see in the URL at the left, I've manipulated the URL, and Googlebot has gone, crawled this page, and it's got my silly little link in the top. So we know that Googlebot is now executing the JavaScript that we inject into other people's websites. You can, if you want, just rewrite the whole content. So you can start making your own web pages on other people's domains. Don't do this. You could do this. Don't do this. We also know that these URLs, these links, get into the index. So this is showing the Chrome cache, Google cache, for a URL. That try me link has been injected into this URL via cross-site scripting attack. But it's made it into the index. So Google has executed the JavaScript, updated the web page. So these URLs allow us to change other people's websites and will index that content, which seems like a pretty dangerous thing. Once you can do that, you can start to have fun as an SEO. You could update the canonicals on other people's pages. Here, once again, is the mobile-friendly tool showing that, yes, if you update the canonical with JavaScript, Google respects that. Just to verify that, in the URL inspector tool, Google confirms, yes, this is the correct canonical for this. So now if you wanted to go to Revolut and start canonicling some pages to yourself, you could do that. They fixed that bug. Or, of course, the obvious thing for us as SEOs is just to start building links. So this is the Deutsche Welle website, and you can see we've just injected a nice little link for Sandra, so that SMX Munich is in the navigation there. So At this point, you've got quite a lot of control over what you can do to other people's websites. Just to verify that all parts of this work as I believed, I made this URL here on Pernicious Squirrel, which is one of my many testing domains. And it was a brand new URL that didn't exist anywhere else. I then injected that into Revolut's website and sent Googlebot off to crawl it. What happened was Googlebot found that URL and then went and crawled the target page. So they're following these links, they're indexing these links, they're caching these links, or whatever else you do to the pages. Google have also confirmed that a link via JavaScript is just as valuable as any other link. So these links are just as valuable as a normal HTML link. I think there is an argument here around that already for years people have been able to inject links into sites by comment spam and that sort of thing. In my mind, this feels a lot more dangerous because with comment spam and that sort of link injection, it's quite easy for Google to detect, like, oh, this is a comment section and there's loads of links being injected. But once you can inject it into the navigation or you can craft your own pages there, then you've got a lot more power about how you can use this. So yeah, just recapping how widespread this sort of cross-site scripting issue is. On openbugbounty.org, I mentioned there's 125,000 unpatched cross-site scripting issues. There's hundreds of .gov sites, so these are .gov sites where you could build links. There's .edu sites. Almost 200 of the top 500 domains in the world, according to the Majestic Million Index of the top million sites, have unpatched cross-site scripting issues that you can just go to openbugbounty.org, look up what is the problem, and then you've just got the URL that you can use to inject links into their sites. Okay, so there's a lot of black hat uses for this, building parasite links. You can quite quickly build links with this. You can make a whole link network from all these sites if you wanted, or you could just straight up canonical these sites to yourself. Often these URLs are going to be orphan URLs, so I've not attempted to use this to manipulate the search results as I did with the previous thing. After the previous thing, I'm very much on Google's radar, and I wanted to make sure that I didn't cause any damage, and this felt quite difficult to test without actually causing some damage. The important takeaway for yourselves today is that you should definitely be looking to defend yourself. People could be doing this to you. Cross-site scripting issue is very common, so you should get your developers to double down, check that this isn't happening to you. Search inside the Google index, etc., etc. So I reported this to Google back in November 2018. They acknowledged the report. Since then, as I said, they've not managed to fix this. They've cited internal communication problems, but it's been so long, and I'm concerned that this could be happening to us, that I've decided to forgo the bug bounty and talk about this publicly. Okay, so as I said at the start, we've had fun talking about lots of black hat stuff here, but the sort of top-level summary of a positive non-black hat takeaway I'd like you to take away is that I'd encourage you to all go back to sort of the old school SEO mindset of trying stuff and testing your assumptions, because all too often now, as SEOs, we think, okay, someone wrote a blog post about this, so I'm going to do it on my website. I know very much from Distilled ODN, where we do A/B testing, where we can measure the impact of a specific change onto a specific website. What we see is that the same change on different websites often has very different outcomes. Why it might work really well for one website, for another website it doesn't do anything. But if you didn't measure or test that, then you're stuck in the sort of doing best practice world, and you don't even know if you're sort of making improvements. So test your assumptions, think outside the box, and as I said, all of the stuff that I've been talking about in terms of understanding how things work beneath the bottom of the iceberg, which is what motivated most of the stuff I've showed you. I'm just trying to understand how does this work is there ways we can sort of abuse it? But once you understand how it works, you also know how to use it better for white hat stuff. So very much encourage you to sort of bring back the hacker mindset. You can follow me on Twitter up there. I'd love it if you tested out checked out the A/B testing platform. Otherwise, hopefully we've got time for some questions. If you don't want to ask a question up on stage, just grab me after I'm off stage. And like Toby said, ich kann auch Deutsch sprechen. Ich habe wegen Brexit gelernt. So, du kannst auch deine Frage auf Deutsch fragen. Ich werde vielleicht sogar verstehen. Dankeschön.
Well, indeed, this was very fun watching. Should we have a seat on the couch? I'm a little flashed because I don't know what to do with this information. Should I just go home to my developers
I already
and tell them to
updated your website for you
to do crazy stuff? Yeah. Well, isn't there a tool for that? Kind of put your URL down and check whether you got some cross.
It's very difficult to
for
check
every non-tech savvy people, you know.
So every cross-site scripting exploit is a little bit different, but the Open Bug Bounty site I showed you basically shows how it works for every different website you want to do it to. In terms of checking if it's happened to you, it's quite difficult because it happens client-side in the user's browser. There's nothing in your logs to show you that this is being done to you. I could be doing it to your website right now.
And behave.
And because it affects the users just in their browser, your website doesn't necessarily know. The best thing you could look for inside your logs is just URLs that have anything. You could search inside your log files for the word script, because if I've injected that into the URL, then the URL, the request is sent to your server, it logs that. It doesn't know that it's bad, but that's the only way you're going to find out. So search inside your log files.
Okay. This little footprint of, for everyone who is as flashed as me I am, you have the possibility to drop some questions up here, even some hacker questions. For everyone who didn't notice, we use Slido because this room is so full of people and you're kind of sitting 200 meters up there. Just go to slido.com and put in slido.com, also slido.com, and then you put there SMX 19, SMX 19, and then you're feel free to drop us some questions. Well, the first questions just dropped in. I think this is kind of the
what you just asked?
Yeah, what I just asked.
Oh, so this is slightly different. So the best way to check if your site is vulnerable is to check if you've been attacked, because checking if you're vulnerable is very difficult. And that's why there are so many of these sorts of issues on sites, because it's a very common problem for developers to miss that they are using any sort of value. I've shown it in a URL, but you can do it in various other ways. Any sort of value from the user has to be cleaned before it's injected into your HTML. It's a very difficult problem for any sort of developer to sort of catch. So obviously you should make sure your developers are checking for that sort of thing. Secondly, you should search for your own site on openbugbounty.org and see if someone's already logged this about your site. But thirdly, just check if someone's already doing it to you, which is probably going to be the sort of most robust way of seeing if this is bad news for you.
Yeah, what was the domain's name? The squirrel bound.
Pernicious squirrel.
Pernicious squirrel. If I search my most important terms and there's a squirrel up there, I know something happens, and it would be probably been you. Well, there is a smiley back there. I hope it's not that funny. What's the most efficient way of injecting these links? I just published this question. I hope it's okay.
So you shouldn't. Bad. But as I said, openbugbounty.org, for every site, it'll show you a URL of this attack and how you can form it for a specific site. If you wanted to abuse this at scale, like, you probably could do some sort of mechanical Turk type approach, but as I said, like, I'm hoping the takeaway today is to check that this isn't happening to you rather than encouraging you to do it to other people.
I just got a question. I don't know whether it's fake John Mueller or the real one.
Oh God!
I really don't know. That's I just stood up. He's kind of saying,
I'm on to you. Oh God.
Yeah.
There's another question here. Is TescoGlobal.com
Yep.
still ranking in the US? So I shut the experiment down because I was getting overwhelmed with people shopping on my website in the end. There was a brief...
Was it actually possible to get through the basket and
So you could get to the checkout, you could get to the, but then I redirected you away.
Okay.
So
and drop some cookies, by the way.
Well, so the obvious next step was to then just forward you back to the real website with an affiliate code in between.
Yeah, perfect.
So that then all of these people, they're on the website, they're trying to buy, they don't even notice they've just gone via a redirect, which has dropped the affiliate cookie. And so there was an obvious, easy way to monetize this at scale very quickly. I was encouraged by a lot of people to do that, but I didn't, for better or for worse. And then once I killed the site, it took a few days and dropped off.
Okay.
There is an argument there about whether you could then reflect back and try to take over the UK as well. And what was also interesting was it was so effective using a UK website against a much larger market in the US. If someone did a US website to the UK or to Germany, I think you could dominate the SERPs with that. So
yeah. Well, questions are popping up. I love it. What's the most efficient way of injecting these links?
We did that.
Yeah, we did that. If you inject these links via JavaScript, so your computer might see this manipulation.
So if you inject these links via JavaScript, your competitor might see the manipulated URLs in the search results. Yes, because these pages could be indexed, unless you canonical them, in which case maybe they won't. So you could canonical the page away, or you could add a no index and still add the link. There's a variety of things, ways. Just because you're not seeing this in the SERPs, it doesn't mean it's not happening to you. As I said, you can craft your whole HTML page, which I did some demos of. I didn't show them here because I don't want to reveal the sites that are directly vulnerable to this. But you could create your own landing pages on your competitor's website. We've shut down. Go and download a superior product.
Well, that's a funny one. I have to refresh here. How long have you actually been in jail? What is actually, we can skip that, I think.
I didn't go to jail at all. I smoothed over that whole situation.
Almost 300 years. That's crazy. So this is kind of, you said that hreflang.
So this is, you said hreflang are now ignored in XML sitemap, but what if these get injected? I think this is a joke because it's conflating the two different attacks.
I shouldn't publish those smiley questions, right? So don't put smileys in there.
But there's a real takeaway from that is that hreflang are only ignored if you submit the sitemap via that ping mechanism. If you want your hreflang entries to work, you need to make sure you submit them inside Search Console or robots.txt, preferably Search Console, because then they show up there, etc.
Okay. Well, this is a question I just only show you before I publish it. Should we? Or
you can publish that. It's
right.
basically asking, did Google ever try to hire you? No.
So many exploits in such a short of time.
Maybe they don't like me for some reason. I don't know why.
Well, F5 to that. Yeah, what about the link power? Is it gaining it back if you...
Okay, so does my site lose anything? So the injected links, if you're injecting the links with the cross-site scripting, are per Google's own discussion or admission treated like any other link. So those links presumably would transfer some page rank from your site to the target site. So theoretically, you lose a bit of page rank if someone is doing this to you. Probably people are likely to do it to bigger sites because they want to get links on big sites. There's some big sites like harvard.edu or some others I won't mention that are up there. So you can get quite a lot of diverse links. They're probably not going to harm the victim sites very much because there's going to be one or two links unless everybody's doing it. But you still don't want this being done to you, especially if someone is changing the content of your site and it is getting indexed and representing it as your content.
Okay, I think we take more, if you have time. Actually, we are 5 minutes in the coffee break until 4 p.m., so I think a few questions. But before we answer another question, one more disclaimer officially. Again, please, I think that might be a good idea.
Yes. So I don't want to get fired. Was that the disclaimer?
Yeah.
Like, as I said, like I've reported everything I've shown you today to Google because we do this research. This is something that we do at Distilled on the side because we think it makes us better at SEOs. This is the sort of stuff that we talk about at SEO Oktoberfest because we believe it makes us better at SEOs. But almost universally, none of us are actually trying to use this because in the long term, this stuff is you're normally going to get caught, especially like there's black or grey hat link building and stuff, but this is direct black hat security exploits. And so if you got caught, this is going to damage you, damage your clients, whoever it might be. And so it just doesn't make sense as a long-term strategy. So I definitely encourage you not to do any of it, but you need to be aware of this so that you can defend yourselves.
Okay, so feel free to ask him after this last question. Come up to the stage. Should we take this one in? WordPress handle?
So the WordPress one, by default, WordPress is not vulnerable to this. I've tried this on Jono's actual website. And Yoast.com because... Yeah.
Okay, so to be fair and in letting you and Tom enjoying the coffee break, I would say again a big applause. Thank you so much, Tom.
Thank you very much
for having you.
Thank you, Toby.